My father told me to leave my key and never come back after my fiancée slept with my brother. 6 years later, I returned for his funeral, and the will reading made my mother scream before my golden child brother realized the house was never going to be his. The attorney's voice didn't waver when he said my name, not even a little. Not the way voices do when they're delivering news they know will detonate a room, that subtle rise at the end of a sentence, the half-breath before a word that changes everything, nothing like that. He just looked up from the document, looked directly at me across the mahogany table, and said it the way you'd read a street address or a phone number. Calm, final, done. Then my mother screamed, not a gasp, not a sob catching in her throat, a full, raw scream, the kind that doesn't belong in a law office, the kind that sounds like something tearing. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. When it stopped, the room went so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling, a low industrial hum, utterly indifferent to what had just happened below it. Julian sat perfectly still, both hands flat on the table, knuckles so white they'd gone translucent. He was staring at the attorney, then at me, then at Marcus, who sat at the end of the table with his leather folder closed in front of him, expression unchanged, like a man who had already watched this movie and knew exactly how it ended. I'd imagined this moment more times than I could count. In the early months, when I was eating gas station food in a studio apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes. In the middle years, when I was grinding through 60-hour weeks trying to outwork every doubt that had ever been planted in me. And in the last 2 years, when Marcus called me and I understood what was coming, I stopped imagining it at all. I couldn't afford the emotion. I needed the focus. But sitting in that room, watching my brother's face come apart for the first time in his life, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of 6 years lift off my spine, vertebra by vertebra, like someone slowly removing stones. I should tell you who I was before all of this. Before the suit and the briefcase and the car Julian stared at when I pulled up outside the attorney's office that morning. Before I became whatever I am now, whatever word you'd use for a man who clawed his way out of a family that threw him away like last month's billing statement. My name is Liam Whitmore. I'm 34 years old. For the first 28 years of my life, I was the wrong son. Not in any dramatic way. Not in any way anyone would have admitted out loud. But it was there in the architecture of every room we shared. The way my father angled his body toward Julian at the dinner table. The way my mother remembered Julian's college exam schedule, but never once remembered mine. The way Julian's failures were explained away while my successes were quietly minimized, as if too much acknowledgement might create an imbalance no one wanted to correct. Julian is 2 years older than me. He's always been handsome in the blunt, conventional way that impresses people at first meetings. Broad-shouldered, easy smile, a voice that fills a room without effort. He played lacrosse in high school. My father coached one of his seasons. I ran track, came in third at regionals, and my father said, "Third isn't bad." He meant it as a compliment. I understood it as information. I loved them anyway. That's the thing no one tells you about families like mine. You love them anyway. You accommodate the hierarchy because they're your people, because the house smells like Sunday dinners and your mother's perfume and 20 years of memory, and you tell yourself the imbalance is in your head. You gaslight yourself long before anyone else does. I met Clara Dawson at a gallery opening I had no business attending. My friend Theo dragged me, said it would be good for me to get out and be a person. I saw her across the room arguing quietly with a bartender about the provenance of a wine she thought was being misrepresented on the menu. She was right about the wine. She was smart and funny, and sharp in a way that felt new, and we talked for 3 hours until the gallery started shutting off lights around us. We dated for a year and a half before I proposed. I'd spent 14 months setting money aside, not dramatically, not sacrificing rent, just steadily, 50 here, 200 there, treating it like a bill that mattered. I bought the ring from an estate jeweler on Whitmore Avenue, which I thought was a good sign, a private little joke between me and the universe. It was an oval solitaire in rose gold, antique setting, understated. Clara had pointed at something similar in a magazine once, offhandedly, the way people do when they've given up hoping and are just admiring things they don't expect to have. She said yes before I finished the sentence. My parents liked Clara. Julian said she was out of my league the first time he met her, which he meant as a compliment, which I understood as information. That should have been the moment I paid closer attention. I'd been working as a junior acquisitions analyst at a mid-sized firm for 2 years when the foundation of my life developed a crack I didn't notice until it had already split the floor beneath me. It started small, the way these things always start small. Clara started canceling plans with low-grade explanations. Work thing, tired, headache. I told myself it was the stress of planning a wedding on 2 salaries that weren't built for it yet. I I told myself she was an introvert who needed to recharge. I told myself everything except the thing I should have been telling myself. She stopped bringing Julian up in conversation, which should have been a flag. She used to complain about him regularly, in the affectionate, exasperated way people complain about someone who's a minor nuisance in their orbit. Then she stopped. I noticed the absence and told myself she was just being mature, moving past the small irritations, growing. There were smaller things I cataloged without meaning to. A cologne on her scarf one evening that I recognized as Julian's. He wore Bleu de Chanel, had been wearing it since college, a fact I'd always found vaguely irritating because it felt like a brand decision made entirely by personality rather than by preference. I asked her about it. She said she'd run into him at a coffee shop and he'd hugged her. I said, okay. I moved on. I did the math wrong. Her phone started going face down on counters. This is a detail that sounds paranoid in retrospect until you've experienced it. And then you understand it's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition your conscious mind is refusing to complete. The phone goes face down. You notice it. You decide not to make a scene about a phone. You are a reasonable person. You move on. Theo mentioned offhandedly over beers 3 weeks before everything happened that he'd seen Julian and Clara at the same rooftop bar on a Friday night. Didn't realize they hung out, Theo said. He wasn't suspicious when he said it. He was just making conversation. I said, yeah, they've run into each other a few times. I believed it when I said it. I needed to believe it. I worked late on a Thursday in February. Came home early. Not early to surprise anyone, just early because the project wrapped and I was tired and I wanted to be in my own apartment, in my own bed, with the woman I was going to marry. I remember I texted her from the parking garage, heading up. She didn't respond in time. I opened the door to my own apartment. I won't describe what I found. Not because I want to protect anyone, but because some images become load-bearing walls in a person's psychology, and I've spent years now carefully not rebuilding around those particular ones. What I'll say is this: she was still wearing the ring, my ring, on her hand, which was on my brother's chest. And when she saw me standing in the doorway, she didn't move to cover herself or reach for words or even cry. She just looked at me, and I understood in that single moment that this had not been an accident. Julian looked over his shoulder at me. He had the audacity, the specific, refined, years-in-the-making audacity, to say, come on, man, don't make this weird. I set my keys on the kitchen counter. I walked into the bathroom and I sat on the edge of the tub for 11 minutes. I counted them. Then I got up, took my laptop bag and my grandfather's watch from the nightstand, and left. My parents were not a refuge. I should have known better. But grief does something to your predictive modeling. It makes you believe the people who should love you most will rise to the occasion. It makes you forget every occasion they've already had. I drove to their house that Friday evening, sat at the dinner table. I told them what I'd found. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out the facts the way you'd read a police report, because that was the only way I could say the words without coming apart. My mother straightened her silverware. Clara is a good girl, she said. Julian is just more her speed. My father said nothing. He cut his chicken. He chewed. He reached for his wine glass. I sat with that sentence for a moment. More her speed. And I felt something shift in my chest. Not heartbreak. Something quieter. Like a room going cold when a window cracks. Did you hear what I said? I asked. We heard you, my father said. Clara's made her choice. Julian will do right by her. He set down his fork. You've always had a problem with how things actually are, Liam. Too much time in your head. I didn't know then that Julian had been in their ear for a week. Marcus told me years later that Julian had preemptively run damage control, had framed it as a situation Liam was going to blow up, had positioned himself as the responsible party cleaning up a mess. My brother had spent years perfecting the narrative architecture of his own innocence. By the time I walked into that dining room, I was already the problem. 3 weeks after that dinner, I received a formal eviction notice for the rental property my father owned. The apartment, my apartment, the one I'd lived in for 3 years, the one I'd proposed to Clara in, the one with my keys still on the kitchen counter, was, legally, my father's. He'd never charged me market rent. It had always been family. Julian slid the papers across the table like he was dealing cards. You've been a drain on this family long enough, my father said. My mother still didn't look up from her plate. I took the papers. I folded them. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the driveway. I got in my car and I drove to the studio apartment I'd already quietly secured, because on some level I'd known this was coming, the way you know a storm is coming before the weather report confirms it, something in the pressure of the air. And I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes in the dark. Then I went inside, made a list, and started building. The list had 7 items. I still have it. It's in a small notebook I keep in the top drawer of my desk, not as a trophy, but as a kind of document, evidence that I was, at the lowest point, still functional, still thinking. The items were simple. Get the licensing exam exam scheduled. Find a firm, find an apartment you can stay in, stop eating garbage, sleep 8 hours, call no one who knew you before, move forward only. The first job was at a commercial real estate firm called Stantec Property Advisors. Mid-sized, unglamorous, the kind of place where junior analysts were expected to do the work that senior analysts found beneath them and were paid accordingly. I made $41,000 in my first year. My studio apartment cost $820 a month. I ate, I worked, I studied, I went to bed early and woke up at 5 a.m. because I'd learned that the hours before anyone else was at their desk were the most honest hours of the day. Nobody performing, nobody managing impressions, just you and the work. I passed my commercial real estate licensing exam 8 months after I was evicted. I scored in the 94th percentile. There was nobody to tell. I noted it in the notebook. I moved on. 18 months later, I was a senior analyst. Not because of any single dramatic moment, but because I had done, accurately and without complaint, everything that was asked of me, and a significant portion of what was not. My manager, a careful woman named Patricia Gould, 20 years in the industry, the kind of professional who communicates exclusively in specifics, pulled me aside after a portfolio review in March and said, "You think differently than the other analysts. Who trained you?" I told her nobody. She found that interesting. I found the promotion that followed that conversation quietly satisfying, in the way that a precisely made thing is satisfying. Not exciting, just correct. I was studying acquisition law on my lunch breaks. I'd started with basic textbooks from the library, moved to coursework through an online program, then to case studies I requested through the firm's legal department when I had a pretext to do so. I wasn't building toward anything specific then. I was just building, because building was the only thing that felt clean. Then Marcus called. I'd grown up around him the way children grow up around furniture. Present, large, occasionally blocking the light, never quite examined. He was 67, barrel-chested, with gray at the temples and reading glasses he kept losing and finding in his breast pocket. He had the unhurried manner of a man who'd watched enough cycles of boom and bust to stop being surprised by human nature. He also despised Julian in a way that had no temperature, no heat, no drama, just a settled, factual contempt that Marcus kept perfectly controlled, because Marcus controlled everything he allowed himself to feel in business environments. Marcus had watched Julian lie to clients for 6 years, watched enough cycles of boom and bust to stop being surprised by human nature. He also despised Julian in a way that had no temperature, no heat, no drama, just a settled, factual contempt that Marcus kept perfectly controlled, because Marcus controlled everything he allowed himself to feel in business environments. Marcus had watched Julian lie to clients for 6 years, watched him steal credit from junior analysts who were afraid to complain, watched him show up to site visits smelling like whatever he'd had at lunch, which was frequently not food. He'd once discovered that Julian had invoiced a client $4,200 for an inspection that Julian had simply not conducted, had written the report from his car in the parking lot, inventing measurements and conditions from memory. Marcus paid the refund out of his own pocket. He didn't tell my father. He told me 2 years after my eviction, when he called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. "I've been watching you," he said, which would have been alarming if his voice hadn't carried a particular cadence I recognized, the kind a man uses when he's finally decided to say something he's been waiting to say for a long time. Not in a strange way. Your father doesn't talk about you, and I noticed that. I was in my car in a parking structure, eating a vending machine sandwich, studying for my commercial real estate licensing exam on my lunch break. "He never talked about you," Marcus continued, and that made me curious. So I asked around, found out what happened. I waited. "Your father is sick," he said. "Heart, bad. He's not going to be honest about how bad, but I've seen the tests. 6 months, maybe a year." I asked Marcus why he was telling me this. "Because Julian is going to burn everything down," Marcus said. "I've been watching him for 6 years and I know exactly what he is. And your father, God bless him, he sees what he wants to see." There was a long pause. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I thought you should know what's happening. And I thought I should tell you that you're not what he said you were." I sat in that parking structure for a long time after we hung up. Then I called Marcus back and I said, "Tell me what you know." What followed was not dramatic. It was not a scheme or a plot or any of the words that make things sound more exciting than they are. What it was patience and work and a kind of methodical accumulation of position that Marcus and I never explicitly coordinated, but that moved, nonetheless, in the same direction. Marcus had spent years in my father's ear, not aggressively, not with ultimatums or confrontations, just steadily, the way water moves through stone, over coffee, over contract reviews, at the end of long days when my father was tired tired and more honest about his fears than he'd ever be in daylight. Marcus planted one question over and over in different forms. What happens to the business when you're gone? Not Julian will destroy it. Not Liam should have it. Just what happens? My father had no good answer for Julian because Julian had never given him one. In 6 years of grooming to inherit a real estate portfolio worth approximately $4.1 million, Julian had never once sat down with a spreadsheet or studied acquisition law or taken a meeting alone that he hadn't lost. He was a front, a handsome, charming, completely hollow front. I, meanwhile, had taken every licensing exam available to me, had made analyst, then senior analyst, then portfolio manager at a firm that wasn't my father's, earning it with no one watching and no safety net. I understood commercial real estate the way Marcus understood it, from the inside, from the numbers, from the particular tedium of due diligence that most people find unbearable. Marcus knew that. My father had rewritten his will 8 months before he died. My father's attorney, a careful, bespectacled man named Harold Price, whom I'd never met, had Marcus as a witness. Harold Price had gone to Fordham with Marcus. They'd been friends for 31 years. When Marcus called Harold and said he needed something done carefully and correctly, Harold Price understood what that meant. My father was lucid. My father was clear. Marcus told me later that the signing was unremarkable. 40 minutes, a stack of documents, my father's hand steady on the pen. That my father had not seemed conflicted, had not hesitated, had asked Harold 2 clarifying questions about disbursement timelines, and then signed everything and asked if there was coffee. My mother knew nothing. Julian knew nothing. The only people in the room that day were my father, Harold Price, Marcus Webb, and whatever version of regret my father had finally arrived at. I wasn't there. I didn't know the specific contents of the new will until the reading itself. Marcus had told me only, be there and be patient. I flew in the night before the funeral. I hadn't been back to that city in 6 years. The funeral itself was held at a church my parents had attended my entire childhood. White clapboard, old wood smell, the particular acoustics of a room built before amplification. There were maybe 80 people. I sat in the back. My mother and Julian sat in the front. Neither of them turned around. I watched Julian shake hands with people he barely knew, accepting condolences with a practiced grief that was technically indistinguishable from real grief. He wore a charcoal suit that fit well. He had his father's build, my father's jaw. He looked like what he was, the heir apparent at a public ritual that affirmed his position. He probably thought the whole apparatus was already his. The house, the portfolio, the partnership. He'd spent 6 years acting like it was. A man I didn't recognize came and sat beside me near the end of the service. Late 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, a quiet posture. He leaned over and said softly, "Liam Whitmore?" I said yes. "Harold Price," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow." He was gone before the final hymn. I didn't sleep much that night, not from anxiety, or not only from that, more from a particular alertness, the kind that descends before something important, a hyper-awareness of small things, the hum of the hotel HVAC, the specific darkness of a room you've never slept in, the sound of taxis 6 floors below. At 2:14 a.m., Julian texted me for the first time in 6 years. 4 words, "Don't make this harder." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and went back to not sleeping. Harold Price's office occupied the top floor of a building on the east side of downtown, carpeted in a muted gray-green, furnished with the particular expensive restraint of attorneys who bill enough not to need to impress anyone. A paralegal named Donna brought water in glass pitchers. The table was mahogany, long enough for 8 people, though only 6 of us occupied it. My mother, Julian, me, Harold Price at the head, 2 of Harold's associates flanking him. Marcus arrived 6 minutes late, which I realized as he came through the door at exactly the moment Harold began to speak was not lateness at all. It was timing. Marcus understood rooms. He understood that an entrance carries more weight than a presence already established. He sat at the end of the table. He set his leather folder down. He folded his hands. Julian said, "Why is he here?" Nobody answered him immediately. My mother was holding a tissue. She hadn't looked at me since I walked in. I watched her in my peripheral vision, cataloging her stillness. She sat with the careful composure of someone who believed the next few minutes would confirm everything she expected. Hands folded, shoulders squared, the posture of a woman waiting to receive what she felt was already owed. Harold Price put on his reading glasses. He opened the document in front of him. "This is the last will and testament of Robert Clarence Whitmore, executed on March the 14th of this year, in the presence of licensed witnesses, and found to be of sound mind and legal standing per the certifications on record with this office. All prior wills and codicils are hereby superseded." Julian leaned back in his chair. He had his phone out, then thought better of it, set it face down. He exhaled through his nose the way people do when they're impatient but performing patience. Harold read through the preliminary sections. "Personal effects to my mother, jewelry, a vehicle, a modest savings account earmarked for ongoing household expenses. expenses. Then he paused. He cleared his throat. Primary residence, 4 commercial properties comprising the Webb Whitmore real estate portfolio, properties designated in Exhibits A through D of this document, copies provided, all held in trust and assessed at a combined value of $4,140,000. Julian stopped performing patience. All assets listed in the preceding paragraph are bequeathed in their entirety to... The door opened. It was a procedural thing. One of Harold's associates had stepped out briefly and returned. It lasted 5 seconds, but 5 seconds was enough for the room to hold its breath. Harold didn't look up. All assets listed in the preceding paragraph are bequeathed in their entirety to Liam Robert Whitmore, contingent on a 12-month partnership review with Marcus Allen Webb, after which full control passes to Liam Robert Whitmore unconditionally, in perpetuity. The room did not absorb this immediately. There was a lag, a beat of silence where the words existed but hadn't yet reached anyone's nervous system. Harold turned a page. His associates made notes. Marcus sat still at the end of the table with his hands folded and his expression revealing nothing. Then my mother screamed. It came from somewhere below language. She was on her feet before the sound finished, the tissue crushed in her fist, her face a composition I'd never seen on it before, something that had moved past grief or rage into a register that had no name. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Harold. She looked at me. You, she said. One word. Everything she thought of me in a single syllable. Julian hadn't moved. He was still seated, still flat-palmed on the table, but something in his face had undergone a structural failure. You could see the confidence draining from it the way color drains from a face before someone faints. He was looking at me with an expression I had never once seen on him. He was afraid. Harold, Julian said, and his voice had lost something, some smooth quality that had always been in it, a patina of ease worn completely away in 30 seconds. Harold, there has to be is this the current document? This is the current document, Harold said. He removed his glasses. He set them on the table. Signed March 14th, witnessed by Mr. Marcus Webb and notarized by my office. It supersedes all prior instruments. This is your father's final instruction. He was sick, Julian said. He was sick and someone got to him. Marcus got to him. He turned to Marcus with something that wasn't quite fury, was more like desperation wearing fury's clothing. You manipulated an old man. You talked him into this. I'll contest it. I'll get a lawyer. You have every right to contest it, Harold said calmly. I'd encourage you to consult your own counsel. They'll advise you on the evidentiary standard for undue influence and on the certified medical assessment in Mr. Whitmore's file, documenting his cognitive clarity at the time of signing. They'll also want to review the affidavits from 3 independent parties who interacted with your father in the 2 weeks surrounding the signing. Harold opened a folder. I'd suggest they start with Dr. Anita Reyes, geriatric psychiatry, 22 years in practice, who conducted the competency evaluation at my request. Silence. Julian looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with the specific expression of a man who has been waiting years to simply sit still and be looked at. You always hated me, Julian said. I never hated you, Marcus said. It was the first thing he'd said since entering the room. His voice was even. I just knew what you were. And what he was. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, toward me. And I'd worked with your father long enough to believe, eventually, that he did too. What happened next was not cinematic. Real things rarely are. Julian left the office without the sport coat drama or door slamming that the moment might have called for in a different story. He walked out quietly, which surprised me. My mother followed, pausing at the door, turning to look at me one final time. I don't know what she wanted to see. Whatever it was, I hope she found something she could use. I sat with Harold for 2 more hours, going through the portfolio documents. He was precise and clear and patient in the way of a man who respects the subject matter enough to explain it properly. I already knew the numbers. Marcus had walked me through the general structure 18 months before, but seeing it all formal and documented was different. The primary residence, a 4-bedroom colonial that my father had paid off in 2009. 4 commercial properties in various states of lease and development. The Webb Whitmore partnership, 4 decades old, now restructuring with a new principal. Harold walked me through the contest provisions, the documentation Marcus had assembled, the affidavits, the paper trail. Dr. Anita Reyes's competency evaluation was 47 pages long. She'd interviewed my father 3 times, reviewed his medical records, administered 2 standardized cognitive assessments, and documented everything with the particular thoroughness of someone who knew the document would be challenged. It was comprehensive and nearly impenetrable. Harold said he'd seen undue influence cases succeed against flimsier wills than this. He didn't think Julian's attorneys would advise him to proceed. He was right. Marcus stayed. When Harold finally gathered his documents and excused himself, Marcus and I sat alone at the long table for a few minutes, not saying much. He asked about you, Marcus said finally. In the last few months, he'd ask how the market was, what I thought about certain things, and then he'd work his way around to you. Never directly. He was a proud man. He paused. I think he was proud of you in the end. I think he just didn't know how to say it without undoing everything he'd built with Julian. So he said it this way instead. I thought about that. Do you think he was sorry? I asked. Marcus considered it honestly. I think he understood finally what he'd done. Whether that's sorry, I think he just didn't know how to say it without undoing everything he'd built with Julian. So he said it this way instead. I thought about that. Do you think he was sorry? I asked. Marcus considered it honestly. I think he understood finally what he'd done. Whether that's sorry, I don't know. I think it was as close as he could get. I nodded. That was enough. Not good. Not healed, not the warm resolution that movies reach for in the final act, but enough. 6 months later, the house is mine. Not in the triumphant way you might imagine. It's a house. It has square footage and a roof and a kitchen I remember from childhood, and a dining room with a table where very bad things were said to me. I haven't decided yet what to do with it. The commercial properties are performing well. 2 of the leases renewed above market rate, and I've brought in a property manager I worked with at my old firm, a meticulous woman named Cassandra Yee, who has 11 years in commercial portfolio management and a complete intolerance for nonsense. Julian contested the will. His attorney, a capable man named Derek Lofton, spent 3 weeks reviewing Dr. Reyes's competency evaluation and the affidavits and the notarized paperwork, and then advised Julian, in the careful language of capable attorneys delivering unwelcome news, that the contest had no viable path forward. Julian signed the acknowledgement on a Tuesday. I know because Harold called me when it came through. Harold said Julian didn't speak when he signed, just took the pen, moved it across the page, and left. Harold seemed to find this significant. I thought it was just Tuesday. There are practical matters you don't anticipate, inheriting something. I spent 3 weeks with a contractor walking the house. The inspection revealed a section of the basement foundation with water intrusion that my father had likely known about for years and addressed with caulk and optimism. I had it fixed properly. It cost $14,200. I wrote the check and didn't feel anything in particular about it. The house deserved to be maintained. That was enough of a reason. I also discovered, going through the filing cabinets in my father's home office, a folder labeled with my name. Inside, my report cards from middle school, a program from my track regional meet, the one where I came in third, the one my father said third isn't bad about, a photograph of me at my college graduation, taken from a distance, as if someone had stood at the back of a crowd. I don't know who took it. I don't know if my father was there or if someone else gave it to him. I held it for a while, and then I put it back in the folder and put the folder in a box. I heard through Theo, my old friend, still the person who drags me to events I have no business attending, that Clara and Julian are no longer together. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. Some information has no weight I want to carry. My mother called me once, 6 weeks after the reading. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that lasted 4 minutes, which I have not listened to in full. The part I heard before I stopped, maybe 90 seconds in, was not an apology. It was a reframing. The particular kind of explanation that manages to describe events while assigning no meaningful fault to the describer. She said she'd always tried to keep the family together. She said she hoped I could understand how hard it was. She said she only wanted what was best. I set the phone down on the counter. I made tea. I thought about calling her back. I didn't. Maybe I'll call her back someday. I genuinely don't know. There is a version of this story where I do, where I sit across from her in a restaurant and we have a careful adult conversation about what happened and what it cost and what, if anything, is left. I can see the shape of that conversation. I'm just not sure I have the appetite for it yet. Maybe next year. Maybe never. I'm comfortable not knowing. Marcus and I have coffee on Tuesday mornings. He's teaching me the parts of the business I don't know yet. The relationship architecture, the way deals are built over years of small trust deposits, the particular patience required to do this work well and sustainably. He's a good teacher. He doesn't waste words. 2 weeks ago, he introduced me to a developer named Frank Carrillo, third-generation commercial builder, 64 years old, a man who shakes hands once and doesn't need to repeat himself. And afterward, on the way to our cars, Marcus said, "He likes you." Took me 18 months before he liked me. I didn't say anything, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. Last Tuesday, Marcus showed up with a cardboard box, old documents from the early partnership years, things he thought I should have for the records. At the bottom, under folders and old correspondence, there was a photograph. My father, maybe 45 in the picture, standing outside one of the commercial properties on a job site in a hard hat, squinting in the sun. Next to him, barely visible at the frame's edge, a boy of maybe 11 or 12 in a too big hard hat of his own. Me. I didn't remember being there that day. I turned the photograph over. In my father's handwriting, in blue pen, a date and a single word, Liam. Just my name. That's all he wrote. I put it in my jacket pocket. I carried it home. I set it on the desk in the office I've been using in the house. My house now, still strange to say, Still strange to feel underfoot, and I've been leaving it there while I figure out what to do with it. I'm not ready to frame it. I'm not sure I'll ever frame it. It's possible it'll stay in the drawer until I'm old enough to decide it no longer has the power to mean anything. But I haven't thrown it away. That's probably the most honest thing I can tell you about where I am. I'm a man with a photograph I haven't decided what to do with, standing in a house I earned, working at a business that should have been mine anyway, drinking coffee on Tuesday mornings with the one person in my family's orbit who saw me clearly. It's not healed. I don't know if it heals, but it's mine.